Hi, I'm Delphine. I buried my only son on a Wednesday morning, and by sundown, my grandson had locked me out of my own home with nothing but a suitcase waiting on the porch. They said I was grieving, confused, that it was all just a misunderstanding. But then I found the papers I signed, the bank account I couldn't access, the photos where my face had been cropped out, and then the lottery ticket hit. But what hurts more, losing my son or realizing the people he loved most had been waiting for me to disappear. What kind of family does that? And what would you do if yours already did? The morning sun in Charleston never looked so indifferent. I stood by the front entrance of the funeral home, the white paint flaking on the doorframe as if it, too, had been neglected over time. A guest brushed past me without a glance. No one greeted me. No one offered a word. I was just another old woman in black. Inside, the air was overly air-conditioned, too cold for a day meant to honor my son. I scanned the table at the entrance, stacks of folded programs, the memorial slideshow looping on a small screen. My hand trembled as I reached for one, and when I opened it, my breath caught in my chest. My name wasn't there. No beloved mother of Gareth. No mention of me at all. There was a photo of Gareth and Vera on their wedding day. One with Dorian during his high school graduation, a shot of Gareth holding a fishing rod with some of his friends. But the years I spent wiping his forehead during fevered nights, the Christmases, I stayed up sewing pajamas because we couldn't afford gifts. None of that was present. Someone behind me murmured, "I thought she passed years ago." I didn't turn around. I didn't ask who said it. What was the point? There was a time Gareth needed me every hour of the day. I remember sitting up at 3 a.m., a bowl of steaming vapor under his nose as he coughed and whimpered in my arms. I remember making meals from scraps, keeping the lights on with tip jars from the diner where I worked nights. I carried him through every childhood virus, every heartbreak, every skinned knee and broken voice crack. Now here I was, standing in the shadows of a room filled with strangers and surface sympathies. And I was invisible. The chapel was filled with soft music, one of those standard piano hymns that never meant much to anyone, but always made their way into these types of services. I slid into a back pew, behind a pillar. From there, I could barely see the stage. Vera stood at the podium. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. She spoke of Gareth's strength, his charm, his dedication to family. But her version of family began with her and ended with their son. No mention of the woman who raised him. Dorian sat beside her, eyes fixed on the floor. His hands were folded, his shoulders stiff. I kept waiting for him to glance back, to find me. He didn't. The usher approached, whispering something about needing the seat for family. I looked at the half-empty pews and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I stood. My knees ached from the cold, and pride was the only thing that held me upright. As I moved toward the exit, I heard Dorian's voice, low but clear enough. She wasn't really close to Dad anymore. The words punched harder than anything I'd expected. I left. I walked past the guest book, past the photos that erased me, past the polite smiles from people who didn't know me and didn't care to. I didn't bother to find Vera or Dorian. What would I even say? Thanks for the invite? Outside, the sunlight was bright, almost harsh. The warmth on my face felt more real than any word spoken inside that chapel. I called for a cab and stood under the wide oak tree by the lot, clutching my purse. No one followed. No one asked where I was going. As the car pulled up, I opened the door myself and slid into the back seat. The driver, a young man with a tired face, adjusted the mirror. "Church service?" "My son's funeral," I said quietly. He went silent. That was fine. Through the tinted windows, I watched the stained glass grow smaller in the distance. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I simply watched it all fade, the same way they'd let me fade from his story. The cab rolled down Meeting Street, past neighborhoods I'd walked through for decades. Brick homes, crepe myrtles in bloom, people walking dogs, carrying groceries. Life, it seemed, had gone on for everyone else, even for the people who'd chosen to edit me out. We turned down the familiar road to my house, the one Gareth and I had painted ourselves in the late 80s, the one that had mold issues and charm, and a porch I used to decorate every fall. When the cab stopped, I hesitated before opening the door. Something felt off. The shades were drawn. The porch lights, always left on during the day, were off. I stepped out slowly and walked toward the steps. My feet slowed. There, just beside the welcome mat, sat a suitcase. My suitcase. I recognized it immediately, the one I hadn't touched since the road trip Gareth gifted me for my 40th birthday. Its corners were scuffed, the zipper still stuck halfway, just like I'd left it. But now, it was packed. It was waiting, and I was not welcome. I bent down to touch the handle of the suitcase, half expecting it to vanish if I made contact. But no, its coarse leather scratched my palm, just like it always had. It was real. It was mine, and it was full. A folded sweater peeked from the side flap, one I used to wear while baking Gareth's favorite pumpkin bread. A scarf I hadn't worn in years hung loosely from the zipper, its edge dragging on the wooden porch. They had gone through my things. I pulled out my key, slowly, like maybe, just maybe. This was all some awful misunderstanding. Maybe the lock was jammed, or maybe Vera didn't realize I'd stepped out for the service. But when I slid the key in, it caught. Not like before, when it turned easily, with that familiar click. This time, it refused to budge. They'd changed the locks. I knocked, once, twice. My knuckles met silence. Then I heard soft footsteps behind the door, the kind you make when you're deciding whether to open it. The door cracked open just enough to reveal Vera's carefully composed face. No tears, no mascara smudge. Her hair still neatly pinned. "It's best for everyone," she said, voice flat, "if you stay elsewhere for a while." Dorian appeared behind her, eyes down, arms crossed. My voice trembled. "This is still my home." Her eyes didn't flinch, not legally and not emotionally. The door didn't slam. That would have been too honest. Instead, it clicked shut with an almost polite finality. Like a waitress clearing an empty plate, I stood there, staring at the door I'd painted 3 times over the years, the one I decorated every Halloween, the one Gareth used to burst through yelling, "Mom," when he forgot his lunch. Now it stared back at me like a stranger. A neighbor across the street opened their blinds. I looked away and picked up the suitcase. I didn't cry. Not then. The cab arrived 10 minutes later. The driver stepped out to help, but hesitated at the sight of the suitcase. I nodded once, and he loaded it in without asking questions. We didn't speak during the ride. He dropped me off at a roadside motel off King Street, the kind with flickering neon and a buzzer that barely worked. I paid in cash. The woman at the counter handed me a key with a room number scrawled in fading marker on a plastic tag. The room smelled like mildew and disappointment. I placed the suitcase on the bed and sat across from it, just staring. Eventually, I opened it. Inside were my winter gloves, 2 pairs of jeans, a few blouses, my toiletry bag. Everything folded in haste, some still damp from the wash. No care, no thought, just removal. My life had been filtered down to what someone else thought I might need. There was a ceramic dish I used to keep on the bathroom counter. It held my wedding ring and a bobby pin collection. They had thrown it in, broken in two, with the pieces wrapped in a grocery bag. I looked at the ceiling, breathed through my nose, didn't cry. But then I saw a framed photo, face down in the corner. I turned it over. Gareth, age 5, holding a paper crown I'd made from construction paper. We were both laughing. I cried. Later that evening, after a shower that never quite felt clean, I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone. My fingers hovered over Vera's contact, then pressed call. Voicemail. I tried Dorian. The message was read almost immediately. No reply. I sent a text anyway. Tell me if I'm truly not welcome. Still nothing. I lay back on the bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling, counting the cracks. When you've lost your voice in your own family, silence feels less like peace and more like punishment. Outside, a neon light buzzed. Inside, I turned off the lamp, letting darkness settle like a blanket over a chapter I hadn't agreed to end. Sometime near midnight, I couldn't sleep. The sheets were stiff, the air too dry. I reached into my purse, looking for the peppermint I always kept in the side pocket. Instead, my fingers brushed the edge of a folder. It was thick, paper-heavy, familiar. The medical forms Vera had handed me at the hospital. Just sign here, she'd said. It's for the power of attorney forms, for emergencies. I'd signed. My son was in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask, and I would have signed anything to make things easier. I hadn't read them. I flipped on the light. My eyes scanned the page. There, near the bottom, hidden under legal jargon and neatly formatted lines, was a sentence that made my mouth go dry. I read it twice, 3 times, and then, as if the motel had gone suddenly cold, I began to shake. The motel's light buzzed faintly above me as I sat on the edge of the bed, a folder spread out beside me, like a map I never intended to read. The paper Vera had handed me at the hospital, back when Gareth could barely breathe, still carried the faint scent of antiseptic. Just routine, she'd said, to help the doctors act quickly if needed. I hadn't questioned her. I'd signed without reading. Now, with no home to return to and silence weighing on my phone like concrete, I read every word. At first, it looked ordinary. Boilerplate lines about medical authorization, HIPAA waivers, release clauses. But further down, buried in the 4th paragraph of a clause labeled residential agreements, I saw it. Tenant relinquishes permanent rights to inhabit, occupy, or claim residential property currently under shared title with decedent. My name, my signature, dated 2 days before Gareth died. My breath left me. The air didn't return. I'd signed myself out of my own home, out of my life. I dropped the paper, my hands suddenly damp. My legs felt numb. The motel's cheap blankets scratched at the backs of my knees, but I didn't move. I sat frozen in that moment, as if undoing it were just a matter of sitting still enough. The room around me blurred, the walls closing in. I'd survived cancer twice, a divorce nobody saw coming, and raising a child on one income in the 80s. But nothing felt as cruel as this. Vera knew. She planned this. She knew Gareth wouldn't make it, and she counted on my trust, my grief, my exhaustion. I remembered her voice, soft and confident. Just initial here too, Delphine. It's all standard. The ink barely had time to dry. I wasn't just angry. I was humiliated. Some part of me still wanted to be wrong. I reached for my phone and opened the banking app tied to our joint savings. What little we had left after Gareth's medical expenses, what I'd added from my diner shifts, birthday money I'd stuffed in envelopes for Dorian's future. Access denied. I tried again. The screen refreshed. A red banner appeared. Account closed. Contact administrator. My heart pounded. I called the hotline. An automated voice answered, routing me through layers of security until finally a human picked up. Yes, Ms. Rowe, this account was closed 2 days ago by the primary account holder, Mrs. Vera Castell. I didn't thank the representative. I hung up and stared at the phone screen like it might confess. They had taken everything, and I had handed them the pen. I pulled on my coat, not the warmest, but enough, and stepped out into the night. Charleston's streets were quiet this late. A soft breeze rolled through the alley behind the motel, rustling wrappers and drying out my eyes. I walked without aim, just following the sidewalk as far as it would take me. Every step echoed more loudly than the last. It wasn't grief anymore. This was something different, something bitter and older. This was the realization that the people closest to you could carve you out of your own life while you were too broken to see it coming. My name wasn't just gone from the bank account or the deed. It was missing from the family itself, not even a footnote. I stopped walking near a closed bakery and leaned against the lamppost. I could have let the tears come again, but there was nothing left to wring out. They didn't just take my house, they erased me. I returned to the motel sometime after midnight, my feet sore, my head pounding. The air in the room had gone still and stale. I set the folder on the nightstand and unzipped the bag I'd packed in such a rush I barely remembered what was inside. A familiar fabric brushed my fingers, Gareth's coat. I'd grabbed it from the back seat of my car without thinking. I reached into the inner pocket, my hand brushing something paper thin and folded. I pulled it out, an envelope, no address, no stamp, just my name, written in Gareth's unmistakable scrawl, unsteady, but his. I sat down slowly, as if the room had shrunk to make space for only me and that envelope. And just like that, Gareth spoke again. His voice inked in shaky lines on that paper. My fingers trembled as I peeled open the envelope. Gareth's handwriting was instantly familiar, even softened by time and illness. Each letter leaned just slightly to the right, like it had always done when he was nervous. I held my breath, letting the edges of the paper unfold naturally in my hands, afraid that reading too quickly might shatter what was left of him. "Mom," the letter began, and already my throat tightened. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it. I'm sorry. I wanted to be stronger, stay longer, but there are things I couldn't say out loud, and I need you to know them now." I sat down slowly, the paper weightless but heavy in my lap. I've watched Vera grow colder over the years. I ignored it. I thought maybe she was just tired, overwhelmed. But I started noticing the way she talked around you, like you were inconvenient, not someone who raised me. I should have stopped it. I didn't. That's on me. I blinked hard, but the words kept coming. She wanted me to sign over things, to make them easier. And when I said no, she turned to you. "I'm sorry. I didn't know she would take advantage of you when I couldn't defend you." The tears finally came, slow and silent. "If anything happens to me, please remember this house, our history, our family, it's yours. Not because of any document, but because of what you've carried for all of us. He didn't sign love or yours truly. He didn't need to. He ended with a line that stopped me cold. I know they'll try to erase you, but I was raised by you, and I remember everything. I read the letter again and again. I didn't count how many times. The paper grew warm from my hands. The ink blurred in places I hadn't realized I'd touched with tears. I folded it slowly, like something sacred. The next morning, the light in the motel room cut through the cheap blinds in long yellow strips. I turned toward the suitcase, still sitting at the end of the bed. I hadn't opened it again since that first night. But now, I felt something shifting. I unzipped the smaller front pouch. There, wedged between a pair of old wool socks and a copy of Gareth's last medical bill, was a small, carefully wrapped box. Taped edges, crisp folds. My handwriting on the label, "Happy Birthday, Dorian." I had mailed it a week before Gareth passed. It was supposed to arrive 2 days before the funeral, but someone, either Vera or Dorian, had returned it. No explanation, no message, just the package, unopened. I didn't open it now either. I placed it next to Gareth's letter on the motel desk. "They can't rewrite my love," I whispered aloud. The words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like fact. They could scrub my name from the obituary, hide the photos, spin a narrative, but they couldn't erase a life I lived beside my son, day in and day out. They couldn't erase the nights I rocked him through croup, or the afternoons I worked double shifts so he could go on that school trip to Washington. They might try to replace me in his story, but the ink of our memories was set in permanent ink, and I still had the pages. Later that evening, after I'd made myself a cup of motel coffee that tasted more like cardboard than caffeine, I sat down with my phone and turned on the lamp. I took photos of the letter, every page, every word. I backed it up to my email and 2 cloud drives. I wasn't going to lose this again. Then, for the first time since the funeral, I wrote something of my own. The note to Dorian was short. "You've made your choices. I see them now, without denial. I raised you during summers, holidays, school breaks. I held you while your father worked nights, and your mother was too tired to function. You called me Mama D before you even said the word Mom. I'm not asking for a place. I'm reminding you that I earned it. No begging, no drama, just truth. I saved the message, didn't send it. Instead, I closed the app and picked up Gareth's letter one more time. I pressed it gently back into its envelope, the paper still warm from my hands. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't scroll. I didn't browse. I just opened a blank email and typed, "Subject, you may think you've won." Gareth's old phone was still in my purse, tucked between a pack of tissues and the charger I'd nearly forgotten to bring. I powered it on and waited, tapping the desk with my thumb. When the screen flickered to life, I scrolled through the messages and found one labeled, "Draft, only if." That was it, just those 2 words. The message was unsent, time-stamped 3 weeks before he passed. All it said was, "Check folder, safe house, only if things go wrong." I followed the trail, a folder buried in the Notes app, protected by a 4-digit code. I tried his birthday, then mine. It opened. Inside was a single video file and a PDF. I clicked the PDF first. It was a scan of the original deed to our house. My name is on it, clear as day, underlined, even. Gareth's handwriting had marked it, protected until death or transfer by both parties. Then I played the video. Gareth was lying in bed, hair thinner than it had been just weeks earlier. His voice hoarse, but his eyes were sharp. If Vera gets a hold of the papers, don't trust what she says. Get someone to look at them. I didn't sign over the house, not fully. I kept Mom's name on it. If anything happens, fight back. I paused the video, then played it again. This time, I didn't cry. By mid-morning, I was at the public library, printing everything from a USB drive I carried like it was my last bit of dignity. The woman behind the counter gave me a side glance when I asked to print over 20 pages, but I handed her the dollar bills before she could say anything. From there, I walked 2 blocks to a legal aid office downtown. The building was modest, faded carpet, chairs that creaked, but the receptionist greeted me kindly. I'd like to speak to someone about a deed and a potential fraudulent transfer, I said. My voice didn't shake. The woman took my name and said someone could meet with me the next day. I thanked her, left my documents, and walked back out into the Charleston heat. I didn't feel small anymore. Around 4 that afternoon, curiosity pulled me down a familiar sidewalk, one that led to the house I'd lived in for decades. I didn't approach the door. I didn't knock. I stayed across the street, hiding behind the thick hedges of the neighbor's fence. From there, I saw the living room window. The wall once covered in family portraits was still there, but different. There were photos of Gareth and Vera, Gareth and Dorian, a canvas of Dorian's college graduation. But the wedding photo, once a proud center, was altered. My face had been removed, cropped out so cleanly you wouldn't know I'd ever stood there. Vera had taken my place. Her hand rested on Gareth's shoulder, as if I'd never belonged beside him in the first place. My stomach clenched, not with sadness, but clarity. They weren't just rewriting the future. They were trying to edit the past. That night, I wrote a letter. No threats, no accusations, just truth. To Vera and Dorian, it began. You can replace my face on the wall, but you will never erase me from the truth. I carried Gareth through scarlet fever, single motherhood, and 3 job losses. I taught him how to tie his shoes and helped him through his first heartbreak. I'm not a memory you get to discard. I'm the root you grew from, whether you like it or not. What you've done is cruel. What you've tried to take is mine. But I'm not here to beg. I'm here to remind you I haven't gone anywhere. And I never will. I printed it, folded it, sealed it inside an envelope, addressed to the house I no longer called home. Alongside it, I prepared a certified copy of the original deed and addressed it to the attorney Vera had used. 2 packages, 1 message. Back in the motel room, I stood in front of the mirror. The reflection looking back at me wasn't some frail old woman cast out of her son's life. It was the mother who raised a man. It was the woman who wasn't afraid to be alone because she knew she had truth on her side. I unfolded the draft message from Gareth one more time. His words played in my mind like a voice not gone, but tucked behind the curtain of this life. You always taught me to be strong for others, Mom. Now, be strong for yourself. I whispered into the mirror, I have one more move, and I'm not wasting it. Later, under the flicker of the bedside lamp, I set the phone down and crawled beneath the sheets. My body was tired, but my mind was wired with something stronger than caffeine. Resolve. Just as I closed my eyes, the phone buzzed. One new notification. Powerball results available. Check your numbers. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering. Some tickets are more than numbers. They're last chances dressed like luck. I didn't open the app right away. I let the notification sit on my screen as if acknowledging it too soon would somehow ruin whatever strange luck was looming in the air. It pulsed softly in the dark, that line of text, Powerball results available. Check your numbers. I reached for my purse on the nightstand, dug past tissues and receipts until my fingers brushed the folded slip of paper, the ticket Gareth had handed me 2 weeks before he was admitted. Buy it for me, just in case, he'd said, pressing cash into my palm like it was part of some childhood dare. The ticket had gone through the wash. I hadn't meant to keep it, but there it was, wrinkled, water-stained, and still legible. With a steadying breath, I opened the lottery app and typed in the numbers: 8, 26, 34, 42, 59, and the Powerball, 11. They matched. I checked again, then again. My stomach clenched. I scanned the barcode. The screen blinked. Congratulations. $42 million. I didn't scream. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. I just stared. By noon, the next day, I was seated in the corner of a downtown bank office. The estate advisor was discreet, just as the Lottery Commission had promised. She wore a crisp blazer and asked no unnecessary questions. I answered what I had to, declining photos, interviews, press. She guided me through the process of setting up a blind trust. My name would stay out of any news release. My winnings would be routed through layers of legal protection. She called it the armor for your next chapter. I liked that. The first purchase I made wasn't a car or jewelry. It was a 12-month lease, paid up front, for a one-bedroom apartment overlooking the river, clean, quiet, anonymous. The kind of place people pass by without ever wondering who lived there. I bought new clothes, a new phone. And then I sat at the tiny kitchen counter, pulled out Gareth's old safe house file again, and began building something no one could erase. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Harlan Voss, Gareth's lawyer from years ago. The voicemail message was gruff and dated, but I left my name and a brief reason. I have a deed I need reviewed. It's urgent. The second call was to the clerk's office. I requested a certified copy of the most recent title transfer on my home. The one Vera claimed was hers. I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't sitting idle either. This wasn't about fury. It was about precision. Back in my new apartment, I opened the laptop and reviewed everything Gareth had left. His voice echoed in my mind, steady even in his weakest hours. Don't let them paint you out of your own story. I began outlining my next steps: the estate documents, the lawyer introduction, a quiet audit of the trust Gareth had once mentioned but never finalized. I wasn't building a case. I was fortifying a legacy. The sun dipped behind the bridge, casting long shadows across the floor. I made a cup of tea, real tea this time, not the watery motel brew, and stood by the window. Charleston moved below me, unaware. I thought about what I could do now, how I could retaliate, expose, shame. I could buy the house outright and evict them with notice served over breakfast. I could call the media, leak the footage from Gareth's safe house video, make Vera's face synonymous with betrayal. But none of it appealed to me. What I wanted was balance. What I needed was dignity. They took what wasn't theirs because they thought I had nothing left. Now I had the means to act, but more than that, I had the clarity to choose how. That night, I sat at the desk and wrote 2 letters. One to Vera and Dorian, short, formal, and enclosed with a copy of the deed Gareth had notarized before his death. I suggest you vacate the premises before the legal process makes the choice for you. No anger, no venom, just the language they used on me. Turned politely back around. The second envelope went to a private investigator, a name recommended by the estate advisor, known for quiet results and airtight discretion. Inside the envelope, I included a copy of the safe house file and a note. Find everything she touched after my son fell ill. I want it documented, not for revenge, just for the record. I sealed both envelopes, wrote the addresses, and left them on the desk beside Gareth's photo. Then I whispered aloud, as if to all of them at once, I don't want a war, but I'm not afraid of one either. 1 week passed, quietly. I stayed in the new apartment most days, my name attached to the lease only through a trust, my money tucked behind 5 layers of legal curtains. If they were watching, and I was sure they were, they'd see nothing. The knock on my door came right after lunch. My investigator, Marcus, handed me a padded envelope and didn't linger. You'll want to watch that somewhere private, he said. Inside, a USB drive. I plugged it into the laptop and waited for the folder to load. Gareth's old safe house account. Files I hadn't seen before. One labeled Audio Poetry Fortour. I pressed play. The recording wasn't high quality, but the voices were unmistakable. Vera's clipped cadence, and a man I didn't recognize. If you want clean ownership, he said, the mother has to be out by Friday. She's still on the paperwork. Vera replied like someone ordering takeout. She'll sign whatever's needed. She's emotional, easy to maneuver. There was a long pause, and then she added, once Gareth's gone, there won't be anyone left to stop me. I hit pause. My hands didn't shake this time. I saved the file in 3 places and backed it up to a cloud I'd set up under another alias. Later that night, a friend from my old church forwarded me a link. Dorian was live streaming. I opened it, expecting another quiet update about his life, or maybe a eulogy 2 weeks too late. But what I saw was far more deliberate. He was in the living room, my living room. Behind him, my lace curtains had been taken down. A new sectional sofa, modern and gray, replaced the one Gareth and I picked out on our 15th Christmas together. In his hand, he held the brass lamp from my bedroom, the one Gareth rewired for me the summer he turned 20. Another relic from her, Dorian said, holding it up like a science project. I'm surprised it didn't crumble when I touched it. The chat comments rolled in fast. She's probably watching from some nursing home. Bet she hoarded cats too. He laughed, and I watched. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop across the room. I just hit record screen and let it run. They weren't careless. They were confident. That was their mistake. The next morning, I walked into Harlan Voss's office with my files organized, labeled, and time-stamped. He was grayer than I remembered, his cane leaning against the desk. I hope you've got time, I said. He pushed his coffee aside and gestured to the chair across from him. Always for you. I handed him the documents, the USB drive, the printouts of Dorian's live stream with transcribed captions. He read in silence. When he finished, he looked up slowly. Delphine, this is more than enough. For what? To bury them in court. I didn't flinch. He leaned back. We're not just looking at civil fraud. You've got grounds for criminal manipulation, estate mismanagement, and defamation. Then file it. He nodded, reached for a legal pad. You sure you're ready for the noise? I've lived in silence long enough. That evening, I sat with my laptop open and reread the email I'd drafted to Dorian a few weeks ago. It was still sitting in my drafts. I hovered over the send button, but something in me shifted. He wasn't going to read it the way I intended. He'd dismiss it, twist it, maybe even post it for show. They wanted emotion from me, something messy to point at. I deleted it. They wouldn't get my grief. They'd get consequences. Harlan worked fast. Within 48 hours, he sent a cease and desist letter to Vera's attorney. Attached were copies of Gareth's safe house video, the forged title transfer, and a formal demand for immediate vacatur of the premises. I watched the email leave his screen from across the desk. Want to know when they respond? He asked. I stood. No, I'll feel it. As I walked out, I pulled out my phone, found the contact marked private investigator, and hit call. He answered on the second ring. I want everything documented, I said. Every signature, every file transfer, every whisper in every room she thought no one heard. He cleared his throat. Just so I understand, you're moving forward. Yes. And your goal? I looked out the window as downtown Charleston buzzed below. My goal, I said, is to remind them exactly who I am without raising my voice. I arrived before the courtroom opened. The marble floors echoed beneath my shoes as I walked toward the benches, my heels softer than my heartbeat. I chose the far left seat at the plaintiff's table, not in the center, not near the spotlight, just close enough to be heard. Harlan came in a few minutes later with his briefcase worn at the edges, but packed like a weapon. He nodded once and laid out the documents methodically. Deed scans, timestamps, USB drives, printed stills. He didn't ask if I was ready. He knew. Vera and Dorian arrived half an hour later, flanked by their lawyer. They walked like people who'd been told they couldn't lose. Dorian wore a fitted navy suit, too big for the man he thought he'd become. Vera's heels clicked too confidently. She glanced my way once. I held her gaze just long enough to remind her I hadn't gone anywhere. When court came to order, Harlan started without theatrics. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He laid the original deed on the table for the judge, dated and notarized, with Gareth's signature and mine preserved in ink that hadn't faded. This document preserves Ms. Rowe's lifelong right to occupy the property in question, he said. It was never legally revoked. Then came the audio file. The court clerk played it through the ceiling speakers, a hushed stillness blanketing the room. If you want clean ownership, the mother has to be out by Friday. She'll sign whatever's needed. She's emotional, easy to maneuver. Vera's voice caught clear. My jaw stayed set. Next, Harlan placed a printout on the projector screen, a freeze frame of Dorian, mid-laugh, holding my brass lamp during his live stream. She's probably watching from a nursing home, the chat read. Bet she hoarded cats, too. I didn't need to explain how that felt. The courtroom already understood. Then Harlan stood aside. Your Honor, we also call Ms. Letitia James to testify. Letitia was our former housemaid. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She stepped forward slowly, her voice quiet but firm. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Castell told me to clear out the old woman's things, said she wasn't coming back, told me to throw out the boxes on the curb before the week was done. The opposing lawyer objected. The judge waved it off. Continue. Letitia paused. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her cardigan. I asked if she'd talked to Ms. Rowe. She laughed and said, "Why? The house is mine now." That was all. It was enough. Vera took the stand next. Her voice was composed, like a news anchor forced to report her own scandal. "There was a miscommunication," she said. "My husband and I discussed transferring certain household rights. His mother misunderstood the scope." The judge didn't blink. "And the live stream mocking her personal belongings?" Vera shifted. Dorian was being theatrical. Young people sometimes make poor choices under stress. Dorian looked down. For once, he had nothing to say. The judge sighed. Then she looked at me. "Ms. Rowe, do you wish to make a final statement?" I stood. I didn't approach the bench. I didn't need to. "All I wanted was to be treated like I mattered," I said. "Like I still existed in the family I built with my own 2 hands. I never asked for luxury. I asked for respect." Silence. Not the cold kind, but the respectful kind. The kind that holds weight. The verdict came shortly after. Ms. Rowe retains full residential rights. All claims by the defendants are hereby dismissed. Immediate restoration of access and title is ordered. Further hearings regarding damages may be scheduled. I didn't smile. I breathed. Outside the courthouse, Vera brushed past me without a word. Her heels didn't click as sharply this time. Dorian trailed behind her, his eyes catching mine for half a second before dropping to the pavement. Letitia hugged me once, brief and warm. "It was about time," she whispered. Harlan handed me the restored deed in a manila envelope. I didn't unfold it right away. I just held it. It's not revenge. It's return. The front door creaked open, as if surprised to see me again. I didn't step inside right away. I stood there, holding the restored deed in one hand, my purse in the other, staring into the space that once held my life and had been stripped of it, piece by piece. Dust clung to the surfaces. The kitchen counter, once cluttered with grocery lists and Gareth's notes, was bare. The dining table still had the small gouge from where Dorian had dropped his first school trophy. Everything looked older, and yet nothing had changed. I placed my purse on the counter. No audience, no applause, no echo of betrayal, just the quiet rhythm of air moving through a house that had waited silently for me to return. The next day I put on gloves and began wiping surfaces, not out of obligation, but because I needed to touch the walls again, to reclaim them. Each pass of the rag was more than cleaning. It was reintroduction. The hallway closet still smelled of cedar. Gareth's coat still hung on the hook I'd left it on months ago. In the living room, I opened the bottom drawer of the console and found a photo album tucked beneath old instruction manuals. I hadn't seen it in years. I sat on the floor and flipped through the pages. Gareth's baby photos, one of him and me at a park, sun glaring, both of us squinting and laughing, and there, near the middle, a snapshot of all 3 of us, me, Gareth, and little Dorian in my arms. Dorian couldn't have been more than 6 months old. His eyes were wide, his hand wrapped tightly around my thumb. They hadn't removed that one. I closed the album gently, like closing a wound that had stopped bleeding. Letitia stopped by that afternoon. She stood on the porch awkwardly, holding a small cloth bag. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said. "You didn't," I replied, stepping aside. She handed me the bag. "Just a few books I found behind the laundry room." I thought you'd want them. I made coffee, real coffee this time, not motel powder, and we sat at the table, two women no longer tiptoeing through someone else's story. I never believed what they said about you, she said after a sip. I nodded. I know. When she left, she hugged me, not the careful, polite kind, the real kind, where your hands grip tighter for just a second longer than expected. The letter from Dorian arrived the next morning. I found it in the mailbox, buried between junk and a utilities pamphlet. The handwriting was uneven, unfamiliar in its hesitance. I don't know what I believe anymore, but I'm sorry. That was all it said. I read it twice, thought about replying. I didn't. Some silences are better left untouched. I walked the house slowly that evening, barefoot on creaking wood. I touched doorknobs I hadn't turned in months. Open windows that had remained shut too long. The bedroom still held Gareth's scent in the folds of the pillowcase. I didn't change it. In his room, I found the letter, the one he'd written for me, the one that had changed everything. I placed it in a frame and set it on his nightstand. Some homes are won, I whispered. Others are reclaimed. I had done both. As the sun dipped behind the magnolia trees in the backyard, I stood at the kitchen sink and let the breeze come through. It carried no judgment, no apology, just air. I didn't think of revenge anymore. I didn't replay the court scene or the live stream or the way Vera's eyes narrowed when the judge ruled. Instead, I thought of Gareth, of how he looked at me the day he graduated, holding my hand just a second longer than the cameras caught. I survived the storm, and I stayed standing. Sometimes we survive not by fighting the loudest, but by standing the longest. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't scream in court. I simply stayed standing when others expected me to vanish. If life has taught me anything, it's this. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Dignity is a form of defiance. And healing begins the moment you stop needing permission to reclaim what's yours. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever been written out of a story you helped create? Have you stayed quiet to keep the peace, only to realize silence cost you everything? Tell me about it. Drop a comment. Say where you're watching from. If this story struck a chord, leave a 1 below. If it didn't, I'd still love to hear why. And where you tuned in from. And, hey, if you believe in stories that remind us how powerful quiet strength can be, subscribe to this channel. There's more where that came from.